Hey, and welcome back to our program. Interesting column I wrote this week. Interesting for me. I hope it'll be interesting for you. Hope you'll take a look at it. It's on my website at JimBrownUSA.com. I talked about this whole controversy with Congressman Steve Scalise. He's a Louisiana congressman, the first district, which is the suburban areas of New Orleans primarily, has worked his way to one of the top leadership posts, just elected to the position of whip, the majority whip in the Republican Party, which is the guy that goes around, gets everybody to vote in a certain way. I don't know what good it does for New Orleans, but it's good for him, and it makes him move up in the Republican ranks. All went well until an obscure blogger, young guy, nice young fella, lives up in Alexandria, Louisiana, in the center of the state. And he's in law school at SMU, apparently does it online. And for fun, really not for profit, he does some blogging. Did some research and found that Steve Scalise, then a state representative in a district that David Duke was a state representative in, had given a talk to a white supremacist group in Scalise's district back about 12 years ago. This started a firestorm where Democrats called for his resignation, and the conservative Republicans, Sarah Palin, Mark Levin, the very well-known talk show host, all said it was abominable and that Scalise should step down. Well, he's not done so, and I just thought I wouldn't want to comment on the column. I hope you'll read the column. I think the interesting thing is the influence of this guy, David Duke. He must be smiling and on cloud nine because he's relevant again. A guy like Duke doesn't worry about good publicity or bad publicity. Any publicity makes him relevant. So I'm sure he's in adulation right now of himself and loving the fact that people all over the world are talking about him and his ties to Louisiana politicians. He says, don't be too tough on Scalise because I know a lot of other politicians that have courted me, courted my votes, and I'll go tell it all if you keep kicking this poor guy. Several politicians down Louisiana, one a candidate for governor, actually was elected governor, and also a candidate for U.S. senator, bought David Duke's mailing list, paid like $150,000, $200,000 for his mailing list to try to get to his voters. Now you say, well, what's so relevant about Duke? You had to be around back in 1991 to see the magnetism of this guy. And he says in his youth, that he had some indiscretionary activities where he was tied to the Ku Klux Klan. And he's a strong white supremacist. You can see that in his writings as he continues to lecture all over the world. Well, I followed Duke quite closely back in 1991. He was running for governor against the incumbent governor, Buddy Roemer, and former governor, Edwin Edwards, three very powerful people. No one gave Duke much of a chance of getting in the runoff. But I was in a lot of campaign events with him because I was a candidate for insurance commissioner of Louisiana. And so there'd be large rallies where they'd have all the candidates. You'd come to a forum, and Duke was often there at the same time I was. The guy really had some magnetism. First of all, he's a good-looking fellow. He had plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, apparently. And all the young girls just swooned over him. They didn't care what his political beliefs are. They just thought he was a good-looking guy, and they were just taken by him. And he had a message, and I think this is the important part right here. He had a message that he was very concerned about the direction of the federal government. And he talked about set-asides, about certain priorities, giving preferences to certain racial groups when they go to college. Some of the problems in the welfare system, he felt like that welfare recipients should be drug tested. Too much power of the federal government, the federal courts out of control, much too liberal. And that was his basic message when he ran. And people are appalled that he was elected, but quite frankly, it's the message of many Republicans in this country today. The message hasn't changed. So it was an appealing message to white middle-class Americans and to white middle-class Louisianians. And they flocked to Duke in large numbers. I don't want to say just middle class, across the board, lower class, middle class whites flocked to Duke. I saw an interesting observation. I went to a place over around Lafayette, Louisiana. That's the center of South Louisiana for you folks out of state. David Duke was there, and I came in first, sat down at a table, and there's a big political gathering called Crawfish Town, USA. Huge restaurant where they serve the best crawfish you could find in our part of the country. And I sat down there at the table. I was with an LSU football coach, and a bunch of friends were there breaking bread and having crawfish. David Duke walks in, and he came over to our table and said hello, and he's very pleasant. Of course, all eyes in the restaurant were on Duke coming over my way. Then he sat down close by, a table or two away, and I watched him for several hours as person after person came up to him to shake his hand and give him a $10 bill, a $20 bill. I saw $100 bills, and this went on most of the night. He was very taken by this white audience that felt like that their rights had been abused, and they were for Duke. So you almost had to see this guy in action. I went to a couple of these large gatherings where I was speaking on my candidacy in my behalf, and Duke just mesmerized the crowd. What was that song? Everything I do for you. Brian, somebody is the singer of it. Big #1 hit some years back. That was his theme song. And Duke comes out and the crowd just goes wild. So he had a certain magnetism then. It got tarnished for the fact that he went to prison and that he became almost irrelevant. And so I think he's overjoyed at all the attention he's getting right now. But I think the message here now is, don't think that David Duke is alone. Anybody that espouses anything Duke says is some Ku Kluxer way out to on the fringe. I think what David Duke said in his campaign for governor and his races to the Louisiana legislature are a message that many Republicans have picked on today, and therefore the Republicans have got to come to. Here's the point I made in the column. Republicans have a problem with perception. You see, they built this tent based on conservative values, many of which I agree, but the tent just is not broad enough. They can win races, they can control Congress, they control the House, control the Senate. When it comes time to winning the presidency, they've got to enlarge that message to talk about economic opportunity, how you can pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and how you deal with this class divide where so many rich people can either make so much more money, and give a opportunity for a lot of citizens to say, they're on the right track with the message. There's an opportunity for me if I support a Republican. Right now, that's not happening. And if they don't do that, you're going to see a Democratic nominee be elected president in 2016. So David Duke is still on the scene. He's relevant. And whether we like it or not, we'll be talking about him some more. Be right back after this message.